This episode is sponsored by yet another incredible company that I stand behind fully, and that is Bubs Naturals. Now, I've not only used Bubs products for 4 years now, but I've also had the founder, Sean Lake, on the show twice. And they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, 20% off your entire order, and I will give you that code in a moment. Now, Bubs has a very powerful backstory. Glenn Bub Doherty is one of the 2 Navy SEALs killed protecting the CIA facility in Benghazi. And wanting to honor his best friend, Sean stood up this company. Now, it began with their flagship product, which is their collagen. And I have to say, as a Brit with really dry skin who's now 51, I cannot underline the importance of collagen in your diet. I have seen a huge positive impact on my skin, nails, hair, and most importantly, digestive system. Another thing that I use religiously is their MCT creamers. That's the part of coconut oil that is good for our brain. And they come in dairy and non-dairy, depending on your diet. Now, I started taking Bub's latest product, creatine, about 3 months ago. And that was primarily because it's been proven to improve cognition and brain health. But not only did I witness that, I also saw an improvement in my performance, my lean muscle mass, and even a reduction in inflammation and sports injury pain. Now, in addition, Bubs makes apple cider vinegar gummies, vitamin C, and their hydration product, Hydrate or Die. And several of these products are also NSF certified, which is the highest level of certification as far as efficacy and cleanliness. Now, one of the most important elements of this company, in my opinion, is that they are a social business, meaning 10% of their profits go to charity, and in this case, it is the Glenn Doherty Foundation. Now, as I mentioned before, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, 20% off your entire order if you use the code BTS at bubsnaturals.com. And if you want to hear more about the products, the backstory, and how Sean used Glenn's story to help other veterans, listen to episodes 558 and 1055 of the Behind the Shield podcast. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Army National Guard veteran, Tulsa Fire Department District Chief, and the CEO of the 343 Fund, Nate Morgans. Now, what makes this conversation so powerful and important is not only Nate's courageous vulnerability when discussing his own mental health struggles and battles with alcoholism, but to have someone with his background and his rank talking so transparently about Ibogaine and the efficacy of plant medicine, this is a conversation that everyone needs to hear. The way that we bring hope to people that are struggling is, firstly, we show them that so many other people are also going through a similar battle, but then we illustrate the immense toolbox that is available to them, therefore giving them hope. So many people have tried a counselor and had a horrible experience, or they tried EMDR and it didn't work, not realizing that there were multiple other avenues that would be effective, that then in turn would also amplify the therapies that they were currently trying. So before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. And in this and many other cases, that may truly save a life. So with that being said, I introduce to you Nate Morgans. Enjoy. Well, Nate, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Angela, for making this connection, Angela Skudin. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Angela she wanted me to extend a nice hello to you as well. So
brilliant. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
What's interesting is I had Danny from House of Pain on the show probably about 3 years ago now. And I know that the Outsider's House was something that he became incredibly connected with. And then I discovered through our conversation that you guys are actually friends. So while we're on the Tulsa subject, let's start there. Talk to me about Danny, the Outsider's House, and the connection that you guys have.
You know, I met Danny through like a mutual connection, and had ran into him a couple times in town. Tulsa's not a giant town by any means. You know, we're about 500,000 inside the city limits, and so you'll inevitably run into folks over time. And then he found out about what we're doing with 343, and we ended up having coffee together, and it was awesome. I mean, we ended up, it was like a 3 hour, it was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting that turned into a 3-hour meeting, and we've done it twice now. He set me up with their executive director of the Outsiders House Museum Foundation, and we discussed, you know, just learning lessons for nonprofit management, which is not something that, you know, as a Tulsa fireman they teach in the academy. You know, like there's some stuff you got to learn. And so it was great. He's been nothing but a wonderful advocate for us.
Didn't you say you guys have even responded to that house before in the past?
No. So like, there's a firehouse just across the road. Engine 3 runs out of Station 3, and they kind of started getting together. Another friend of mine on the job met him, ended up on the board for the Outsiders House Museum. Danny's switched into the Tulsa Fire Department, man. He's ridden on the truck a couple times. I think he put something out on Instagram the other day. He's like, I'm on a fire truck. And I told him he can come. I said, you can come ride a whole shift if you want. You're going to get tired though. Like just running overdoses and, you know, the unhoused. That's what our primary customers are where I work. So.
Well, that's an interesting segue. So we're obviously going to talk about mental health in the fire service in a minute. With this lens that you have now, and we'll get to your experience with Ibogaine and, you know, some of the other areas, but has that shifted your perspective on the kind of origin stories of some of these men and women that you run on the streets?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I suffered from, you know, alcoholism and alcohol use disorder. That's what ultimately took me to Ibogaine. But, you know, I always saw that in a different lens than someone else who was on some other substance. You know, if they're out there, you know, doing black tar heroin or meth or fentanyl out in the streets, I'm like, those guys are different than us. Obviously, I see that differently now. I see addiction as a pretty common problem that's the result of other mental health conditions or environmental conditions that start with, you know, from childhood. So I definitely frame the problem of both homelessness and addiction in a different light than I did 27 years ago when I started on the fire department, you know?
Absolutely. Well, I want to go through the through line and we'll probably revisit that topic, but let's start the very beginning of your journey then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yeah. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My dad started with the Tulsa Fire Department in 1969. So I grew up in a firehouse. We lived out in a rural community north and east of Tulsa for a big chunk of that time. Myself, I've got 3 other siblings, 2 older sisters and a younger brother. I had We ultimately moved to a suburb of Tulsa, somewhere around middle school or high school time frame. But like, um, I never had any intentions of being a firefighter, like at all. My goals were to go to West Point and be an Army officer, and that's it. And it's life does what it does. And I went to high school in Bixby, Oklahoma. It's a suburb here of Tulsa. Normal-ish childhood. We play football and sports and normal. At least for Oklahoma anyway. And just when I was 18, which is interesting because my son just graduated high school last week. When I was 18, I couldn't wait to get out of Tulsa. I was on the first train out of this town, no matter what. I was leaving here. I wanted to go join the military and see the world. And I got a 3-year respite from that, and then I got on the job. So everything changed.
Going back to your father's service, firstly, operationally, talk to me about the environment that he was working, obviously, before you were even born, but some of the stories you heard as far as, I'm assuming lack of SCBAs, tailboards, etc. And, what have been the conversations about the evolution of the fire service through your shared eyes?
Yeah, it's great. Dad's got about 70% of his lungs that do work. He jokes about the 30 years between his start date and my start date, and we had 4 years together on the job, which was cool because Dad crawled into a couple fires that I was in, and he would embarrass me just being around. And he would not have a mask on even then. This was in 2001, 2002-ish, time frame. And, you see pictures of my dad from the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and he's at fires, and he never has a mask on. Nobody does. And it's just kind of funny. Like we had a big multi-alarm fire one time. It was really cold for Tulsa. It was like -10 degrees, and the air packs we had at the time, which were like Survive Air Panthers, they were brand new. They kind of frozen up, and they assigned me to like Division C. I get over there, come to find out my dad's the Division C commander at this fire, and I'm like, "Hey, where's the air packs?" And he's like, "There's not any air packs. Get in there. Shut up." Okay. And it was nasty, man. It just snot down to your knees, and you're like. And I remember getting out, and he and I walking after the fire was over. We were walking out to my truck, and he was helping me. My gear had frozen to me, like I was this little frozen man. And I was like, "Hey, help me get my coat off." And he's like, "What do you think? How do you think it went?" And I told him, I said something like, "Screw that old way, man. That sucks." And he just laughed. Give him so much pleasure. Screw that old way. That is not breathing out of a fog nozzle is not fun at all. I don't care who you are. It's tough. You can always say you did it, but it ain't fun. No, but the evolution of how it went, I think there's a retiree fish fry on Saturday, and it's going to be funny because all these old guys are like, "My God, we fight 2 fires a day." I'm like, yeah, the whole city fights 2 fires a day, dude. And I'm like we still do that crap. It's just like the busy companies back then made 600 or 700 runs a year. Like the busy companies now are north of 4,000 runs. Like it's night and day difference. They didn't have EMS. They didn't have paramedics. But what's interesting, and I did a study on this when I was in the executive fire officer program, we have less firemen today than they did in 1975. Mm-hmm. Like they had more firemen, but we have less people in field operations riding fire trucks than they did then. I mean, there's about 4 or 5 less companies in the city of Tulsa now than there were back in the 70s. I think they were just flush with oil money or something. I don't know.
Well, I think it's the opposite too, because you hear about some of these catastrophes. I mean, the 2008 crash, for example, where all these cuts were made. And then we
Oh,
came out the other end, and no one was put back. And then you add in what we're going to get to, which is, the devolution of working conditions and how that has a real, life altering or life taking effect, and how that's affected recruitment and retention. And yeah, I think you see that a lot. Doesn't matter how many you are supposed to have, how many actual firefighters the department has. And we know that so many are, literally working at 70% of staffing, 75%. That is less than when they were running a fraction of the calls before. So, surprise, surprise, we've got this massive mental and physical health crisis. Well, one of the reasons is, people that are supposed to go home aren't allowed to go home.
yeah, man. And we probably will go on for hours about this, but like, I've only been doing this 27 years, but runs have never gone down in a year, year over year. It's like, oh man, I think we're close to 100,000 calls a year right now for Tulsa. And I don't see that decreasing. I don't see society or the community needing us less. I see that increase. What I have seen and what I will brag about our organization is innovative resources like mobile integrated health and community paramedicine that's dedicated to reducing the number of 911 calls, to not accepting, well, that's the way we've always done it as the answer, and changing the way we're responding to some of this stuff.
Yeah. I think there are long-term solutions, like addressing the physical and mental health crisis in the nation. If only we'd had a pandemic or something to really make us change the way we think. And then again, integrating 911 telehealth, in the actual, so not even the community paramedicine, but even better, where you call 911 and you're a new parent and your 13-month-old has had their first vomiting, and you're like, oh my God, they're going to die of, dehydration. And they say, well, we can call an ambulance, or would you like to speak to an ER nurse? Well, ER nurse sounds great. They have that call, they handle it, they either treat at home, they schedule an urgent care appointment the next morning, they set up an Uber for that person because they don't have transportation. The ER bed stays open, and that crew never even got that call. And I think that's absolutely those two, the health of the nation in general, and then, that third tier of EMS, which is community medicine, the non-emergent calls that people still need some sort of intervention, but it's not an emergency intervention.
And I'm sure, I don't know if you know this or not, Tulsa we don't do EMS transport. We're simply the first response agency for a public-private trust that does the transport piece. But the Tulsa Fire Department, largely in conjunction with, Family and Children's Services and the police department, largely do share the entire burden of that mobile integrated health piece. Just because, it's, we know that we're wearing our stuff out and our people out. More importantly, our people. I worked on our busiest engine company when I was a captain. I was a captain from 2007 to 2007, 2014. I worked on our busiest engine company, and we were an ALS company, which was great because I didn't have to do, all the reports. The smart street scientists, the paramedics did those. We were 4,500 rounds a year, something like that, on that one engine. It was just like racetrack, and you'd pull back in the station and the drop would hit and the doors would be going up for the next call. And now that same station is in the district that I command. Both trucks, the engine and the ladder, are ALS, and they just swap calls. They built another station a mile and a half to the south and east of it to take some of the pressure off of it. And that station is Station 27. They still make 5,000 calls a year at Station 27. That's a lot. And it's been that way since it was built in 1974. So it's, I think I will brag on us as an organization, man. We're doing some innovative stuff. We're trying, and I'm sure I know we're looking at work schedules as a long-term solution as well. But Tulsa Fire Department's about 750 strong for an authorized strength, 31 stations, 40 some odd, 45, 46 companies. We're a medium-sized metropolitan fire department, I guess, medium to large. It depends on how you gauge it. To somebody like Houston or FDNY, we're tiny, and somebody that's a 6 or 7 station department anywhere else in the United States, we're big. But we've got a good share of structure fires that keep us busy. That'll never go away. That's just that those follow socioeconomic paths and parallels anyway. So, but I think Tulsa is a gritty city that it's a hell of a place to be a fireman.
Well, going back to your father's service, as you reflect back now with this 2026 lens, do you see the impact of the job on the mental health side and the impact of, you as a child in a household that had a firefighter parent?
Yes, in a couple of different facets, I think. We didn't ever ask Dad about his shift, that I can remember. And Dad promoted to chief in 1988, something like that. So he came off the rig, in 88. But I remember, we just never talked about the kind of stuff he ran on. We would anecdotally pick up some of the stories about, stuff he'd seen, but it was always more of a warning than it was anything. Like, you boys need to be home before midnight. Nothing positive happens after midnight, I promise. He was right. I use that same line on my kids now. But he worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time. Dad drove a grain truck for a long time, back and forth. So he was a C shift guy, and he would drive a grain truck on A and B shift back and forth to Kansas City, and then go back to work. And I think that our pay has improved enough where guys aren't required to have a second job. That's like but it was like that when I came on. I mean, I had to do something. I think I made $29,000 a year in 1999 during the academy, and I thought I was rich. But I also lived with 2 other single firemen, and partied for 2 days and then worked for 1, and I don't know. It was a different world. But once I got married and started having kids, man, you had to have something on the side. And we just didn't make that kind of money.
Yeah, I mean, even when I got hired in Hialeah, and then we're talking 04, so later than you, the demand was so high, and I've said this on here a few times, that they didn't even advertise how much they were paying. And then when we discovered how much we were paying, I can't remember if I got this right in my head, but I think it was like $32,000 living in South Florida, which is not cheap cost of living in 04. And I think Miami-Dade paid almost double that. So yeah, I mean, again, a lot of us needed to work on the side as well to make ends meet, or, back then, obviously leaning into overtime, which is not how you're supposed to fund your family's finances or how you're supposed to staff your fire department.
And I think that, to answer your question, I think the psychological effect on the family with Dad was that he was gone a lot. I mean, we knew he was not staying at our house every 3rd day. And I think that's an affect of children of firefighters. They get used to your pace and tempo, and you're like, oh, Dad's gone. He'll be back. He'll be back tomorrow, and then he'll have another day, and then he'll go back to the firehouse, But I wouldn't call him an absentee father by any means, but it's just a different feel. If you grow up a fireman's kid, and I'm assuming my kids will say the same thing, it's just a different feel. Like they're just, they're not there, and a lot is placed on your mom or the parent that's not there. I mean, obviously, when Dad was on, they didn't have any female, or when Dad started, they didn't have any female firefighters. But I think Tulsa hired their first female firefighters in 1991. So obviously, I think we have 30 some odd female firefighters now. But there are men at home that are performing that same role that my mom did. Where they're just gone for 24 hours at a time. That's tough on any family. You ever notice the only bad stuff that ever happens is when you're on shift at home? Like something breaks, it's you're on shift.
I remember my ex sending me a picture of my son who literally exploded like a grenade in one of those swing seats. And I just was like, I'm sorry. It's all you. So yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. This is what's exciting though with this new, work week revolution that's happening here. I think I just shared an Oklahoma department that became the first in your state a few weeks ago. But it's exactly that. 20 years from now, that next generation of kids won't feel what, a lot of, our generation's children and then you as a child with your father, what they were feeling in the first place. Because yes, mom and dad are going to be gone for 24 hours, but it will be twice a week. They'll have that 72-hour period. And, hopefully the salaries will start rising locally here. They proposed that work week and a $20,000 pay increase because I think people are finally realizing we can't pay firefighters nothing. Otherwise, no one wants to do the job anymore. And I think that's absolutely right. It's no different than any other industry. So, imagine a world where the second job obviously is a day job, your passion project, you're a carpenter, you're a gardener, you're a personal trainer, but you go home every night and then, you do your 24 on 72 off. The kids aren't going to feel like you're gone all the time. Yes, it might fall on a birthday or a Christmas or something like that, but it's not going to be the same environment that our firefighters are going through currently, where not only is it 24/48 or a version of, but mandatory overtime. Now you haven't seen mom or dad for 2, 3, 4 days in a row. And that is extremely unfair. And it's one of the reasons why, we see a lot of struggles in our children as well.
I couldn't agree more. And I know that a lot of fire departments around us are plagued by mandatory overtime. But it's a delicate balance. And I'm assuming we'll get into my career, like all the different jobs I've done, but it's a delicate balance in maintaining appropriate staffing. And then when I came on, James, we didn't have callback overtime. They would just punch a company out so they would just pick a couple companies and they'd punch them out of service for the shift. And then those firefighters would go somewhere else. And then, so ultimately somebody, some chief of some district would be saying, all right, this part of town doesn't get that kind of fire protection today because we're just going to risk it, and that's a way. They did that for probably the first 10 or 15 years of my time on the job. And then over time, we've got a very strong union, Local 176, and we negotiated, hey, we're not punching companies out anymore. That's a safety issue. We're going to keep our fire companies in service. So that's when callback overtime started for us. And it's funny to talk to my dad about it because his whole career, he never had that kind of deal. And he said, hell, if they paid me overtime, I wouldn't have had to drive a truck. I just gone to stay at the firehouse, which it's true. You can make decent money doing that, but at what cost? At what cost is the back end mental health side of this, which, I, as a young fireman and as a young company officer, I never thought about mental health at all. I just rode the boat. Just go get to work and do your job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no one was talking about it, when you came on, when I came on, and like I said, it was so competitive that when you got a position, you were just glad. You were just, don't screw it up. Try and make it through probation because the chances of getting hired somewhere else again are going to be even slimmer if you don't make it this time. Yeah. And, that's great. I mean, it's nice to have a a crucible, and a lot of very grateful first responders at the other end of that year. But if that's taken advantage of, then that's also the enemy of progress. No matter, we go to these funerals and we see these marriages and alcoholism and all these other things, and we just turn a blind eye and shrug our shoulders and say, well, the old guys did it, so we need to suck it up. And no, that's not right. The old guys used to not wear SCBAs until enough of them died that someone said, we need to start wearing SCBAs. And it's the same with the work week. They worked 24/48 because people fought for them from the 24/24s. And you're right, exactly. Seatbelt is another good example.
Tulsa switched to a 3-shift system in I think 1956 or either 56 or 54. They hired the C shift. And if you think about that, that's not that long ago. They're like one on, one off forever. But the workload was completely different. And I'm a firm believer that, we're looking at that workload. We did a sleep study. I was looking on your website before I decided to come on, and I think there's a gentleman that is on your website, and I was reading his study. I think I met him. He was at our station because he did a sleep study here in Tulsa.
Is it Joel?
Yeah, I think so. He looked very familiar. And my guys were hammering him because they were like, "What do you think what is the best schedule?" Because the young kids are all about 24/7 right now. I don't think they care about money. I think they just want their time off more than they want anything else, and that's cool. As a district chief, that's what I do. As I administer who's who in the zoo that day, count to the number of people I need and say, all right, this is who can not be here today. But it's crazy that the guy said something about one of our guys were talking about the 48-96, and he's like, well, actually the studies indicate that's not the greatest schedule. 48 hours is a really long time to be at the firehouse and, getting your ass kicked. And I work in a pretty busy district, so I've always said, when you work a 48 at my age, or our age, it sucks, and I'm in a Chiefs car, I might get, 5 or 6 runs in a busy 2-day period. Can you imagine doing 20 a shift for 2 days in a row? Yuck. Yeah.
Well, it's not even the thing. The thing is that people have viewed the shorter work week as, these young people are weak. And, I just wrote a piece the other day on that very thing for Crackle, the magazine. It's not about that. It's about obviously addressing that we have a mental and physical health crisis that is irrefutable. But also, if you look at performance, no one, as I said, has won a Stanley Cup or a World Series with a team that only slept 3 times that week. Not a single team has ever won sleep deprived, and that's how, the injuries and all the other things. So the 24/72 is about performance. But yes, this young generation, our generation has said, hey, mental health is a real thing. My parents told me it was weakness. And then we had this kind of awakening recently. And now I want to tell you, as you're a child, you should be able to feel your emotions. You fall over and cry, that's a different conversation unless you've broken something. But if you, are struggling with something emotionally, you need to talk about it, and we need to cry. You need to get it out. But valuing that time at home, valuing their physical health, those are all admirable attributes that also factor into a high level of performance as a firefighter, because you're 30 calls deep and 0 sleep, and now you got to make entry on a second floor and do a primary search, and you miss that kid because you can't even fucking see straight. It's not, that's not you being weak. That's your performance has absolutely declined because of these shitty working conditions. So this is what's nice now, is this evolution. It's not about that the firefighters are weak and they want to work less. They want to work effectively in the time that's allocated to them, the same time that every other civilian on the planet works, in this case, 42-hour work week. So they're not asking for 10-hour work weeks. You know what I mean? They're asking for the same as everyone else, whilst they risk their lives. And from 0 to 100, try and find your child in the middle of a burning building. So when you reframe it with performance, I think it changes the way people look at it then.
I wonder if, and so I didn't dig deep enough, but like federally, if somebody is doing the research on changing the FLSA Part K laws to reflect this as a standard. I mean, I think that's largely we fell into this, mainly because the publication was it in 1984. I think the last big change for FLSA was in 1984, where they switched to a choice between a 7 and a 20, up to a 28-day work cycle, and what is and is not declared overtime. And my nerd's showing right now because this is what I did when I was the chief of staff. I learned about all this stuff and the history of it and why the fire service in the United States. And it's at the end of the day, you can say what you want, but it's a money problem we have to overcome. It is. Yep. It's if they had all the money in the world, not everybody would be moral, but they'd be more apt to be moral. But at the end of it's a money issue. I was framing this as a problem for us, and I don't know. You could probably educate me a lot on this, but if we were to hire a fourth shift, would it be as simple as hiring 250 people?
Well, what's interesting is, again, depending on the staffing, if people are overstaffed for covering vacations, sick, etc., or they have a 6 or a 3-week Kelly and they've staffed up for that, then it's not a whole shift that they end up hiring. A lot of people tell me they basically need about 2/3 of a shift to make that fourth shift. Yeah. But the money thing, and I'll keep this short because I don't want this whole conversation to be about this work week, but it is an interesting, perspective on the financial side that I've learned over all these years. I mean, I've been talking about this for 10 years now, is there's a realization that the money's already there. It's just the false economy of how cities and counties are spending. And I don't understand why the financial gurus of these organizations aren't banging on the fire department doors and saying, there is a better way, but they're not. So, you take the average fire department in America that is understaffed, so is relying consistently on overtime. There's a shitload of money, millions and millions of dollars. Then you take the fact that a lot of departments are hiring young people, training them, and then they go and leave 3, 4, 5 years later. That's millions more that you've put all this money into, and then they're going to go serve someone else's community with your education. Then you add the high workman's comp premiums because your firefighters are sick physically, mentally, etc. The medical retirement payments, the God forbid line of duty death payments. How many of these deaths that we've had of people getting lost in a search or falling off an aerial were partly because they were underslept and they just couldn't think in those situations. The intersection wrecks where they had a micro sleep and smashed into a minivan full of kids. And then the lawsuits, speaking of that, I mean, sometimes those are millions because we made a mistake. We were too rough. We pushed the wrong med, etc. So there's all this downstream money that these people just aren't fucking looking at. And I don't understand why. You're paid, 6 figures to be the, CFO or whatever. And you can't understand the basic, principle of false economy, and inefficiency. So most departments are saving money when they go to this, because they fill all the vacancies. The recruitment's gone through the roof because they've said, hey, we care about you. Now you've got a healthier, happier workforce and your people are staying. And you look at Gainesville, you look at Pasco County, Destin, Kissimmee, they're all seeing the same exact trend. And there is this fiscal saving now, not to mention not just on a budget sheet, but the real value, which is a healthy workforce and healthy marriages and healthy relationship with kids.
Yeah. Man. Well, I don't know where you were like 20 years ago. That'd have been handy, though.
They say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago and the second best is today. So that's all we've got.
Yeah, that'd have been really awesome. Yeah, I'm going to be jealous. My son is in the application process right now. And, he as much as I tried to get him to do something else, this is what he wants to do. He's, a volunteer firefighter already. He's got his fire 1 and 2 and hazmat ops and is taking his EMT test this week. And I'm like, man, you think I could have stopped this silly, family business, but he loves it, man. He got the bug, so he'll probably
Good.
be another one of us.
Yeah, but I think this is it. We used to be the biggest advocates. We were the best recruiting tool. And now you
Yeah.
hear soldiers and firefighters and cops saying that they're dissuading their kids. And more often than not, it's not the job. It's the working environment. It's the organizational betrayal. It's a lot of those things that, they don't want their children to do it, and rightly so. But if we fix those things, and this is what one of my son's friends that he's known since preschool just got hired locally here, just finished the fire academy. And they are, as long as they sign it in just over a week, they are going to a 2472, and they gave him this big pay raise. So that young man will get a very tiny taste of the old days where it was a complete nightmare. And then, by 3 years into his career, he's going to have this completely different environment. And then, so it is a career worthy of telling our kids to go into again. But, the working conditions have to be fixed. As I've said in here before, we used to send children up chimneys, and they used to work in factories until someone said, this isn't right. It's the same with the fire service. People need to clean chimneys and work in factories, but the right kind of people, or in this day, robots now. But yeah, the fire service is the most beautiful profession, which is why almost 8 years after taking the uniform, I'm still fighting for it. But we've got to change the way that we actually work these people. We've got to be efficient with taxpayers' money, and we've got to hold the most valuable asset as the human being in the uniform.
Yeah, that's the tough spot, man. I mean, I love that concept of our people are our most valuable asset. That's what makes these organizations great. It's not the brand of trucks we're riding around in. It's, I swear, I think that I can tell you this, you mentioned that housing bubble and the economic downturn of 2008. That's about a year after I made captain. I remember handing out pink slips to firefighters that were on my truck and having to build a plan to go collect their gear, and the uncertainty that they had in their minds. And it was a morale crusher for us. But our union, we took pay cuts. We took about a 6% pay cut, I think, to keep them employed. They were going to lay off 147, young firefighters, and I'm so glad we did. I don't know if we would have the willpower to do that again. And with the economy the way it is, I would still vote to take a pay cut for those younger firefighters. I just know that if we had lost 147 people, that's about 10 companies worth of folks, and we'd have never gotten that back. We'd have never gotten those companies back.
Yeah.
Ever.
And this is, again, the firefighters paying for mismanagement, whether it's at a chief level, county level, or in that case, national level, of which the people that caused that crisis were never held accountable either. And they got bailouts. So, just bear that in mind. All right. Well, let's go back to your timeline, because obviously I want to walk through, your uniform journey. I know you wore several. So you're chomping at the bit to go to West Point. Talk to me about your journey into the military, and then what made you transition out.
Man, transition out. I didn't get into West Point. Ultimately, I ended up going to selected for the early commissioning program at Kemper Military Junior College, and went there. Commissioned in 1998 as a second lieutenant, and moved back to Oklahoma to finish my bachelor's degree. And I thought I was going to go to active duty as soon as I finished that bachelor's degree, but I was wrong. My first service commitment was to be served in the reserves and or National Guard. And I thought to myself, crap, now I got to find a job, like a grown-up job. I just wanted to be, I wanted to be an Army officer. That's it. I saw myself as a career Army officer, and that's all I could really see myself as then. And I remember in 98, once I realized this, I was at Oklahoma State University, sort of attending school. I I was going to some classes, not all of them, but I was attending some of the courses. And my dad, I called my dad and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about trying to apply to the fire department." And he told me he did not think it was a good idea, that I was not suited for that kind of work. And it made me mad. I was like, "Well, screw you, bud. I could do that. You do it."
How hard can it be?
Yeah, how hard can it be? I mean, you do it. And so I went to EMT school in a place called Meridian Technology Center in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And I called him once I graduated from that, that less than one semester EMT school. I was like, "Hey, I got my EMT." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess you could apply." And back then, they had a committee, and Dad was the chief on the hiring committee. And so he took himself off the hiring committee, and, I went through, but, got hired in 99. And left Oklahoma State. I said, "Screw it. I don't need a degree right now. I can wait to get one of those later. I'm going to be a fireman." I was wrong with that too. Man, a lot of this story is about stuff I was wrong about, that's life. But I got hired in 99 and went through the academy. Our academy is about 5 months long. It's ridiculous long. And went out on company, started enjoying my life. What was crazy is that, I caution all the young firemen now that aren't married, or I was talking to a buddy of mine that we lived with when I first came on, yesterday. I'm like, "Man, there's some stuff that we did that would smooth get you fired now." I mean, you can't go out and brawl at a bar anymore. That's not okay. But in the, late 90s, early 2000s, that was pretty common, for us to just basically party for 2 days and then go to work for one of them. It was cool because there's 2 other guys I lived with. We were all 3 on different shifts, and our Kelly day was in the same group. So every time we call it a city shift, every time our city shift would come around, we'd all be off for 3 or 4 days together. We'd go travel and drive down to Austin or, something like that. And it was a lot of fun, man. It was almost like being in college, but with your buddies and a real full-time job.
How competitive was it to get hired when you were looking in the late 90s?
I think they only did one test a year back then. Now they don't do it that way. Now they have bands of time, but I think we took the test with about 2,000 people. They had just hired 2 classes in 98, a fall and a summer class. There was going to be 1 class in 99. I think we were around 30 some odd people in our class, something like that. And then they had another class in 2000, right after us. So it was probably 2,000 people at this place they call the Convention Center. It's now called the Cox Business Center. I remember seeing all these adult men there to take the test, and I was 21. I did not consider myself quite an adult man that way, But guys with beards and whatnot, running around there to take the firefighter exam. It's definitely a different process than it is now.
What are you seeing as far as size of the number of applicants now? Because it's interesting. Most departments, are seeing a fraction of what they saw when you and I were testing.
It is for sure a fraction. However, they do testing bands differently. And I'll speak out of turn on this or not be completely accurate, but they'll open up the test. It's not one singular test at a time where everybody shows up at a convention center to take this, written test. The tests are administered obviously online or at a computer terminal, not necessarily, you don't have to have that many people, I think, there all at once. I think that they said, they literally just said this, that 100, I think we have a class of 24 that's going to be, in October maybe, and there's 180 competing for it right now that have made it past CPAT, you know. So it's still competitive. I'd say it's still competitive, but it's definitely less than the 2,000 plus that I took the written exam with in 1998 or 9, whatever year we took it.
Yeah, I've said this on, this is the best example of the demand when I was testing in Anaheim. This was for the written. Everyone in the room was certified firefighter and EMT or medic. And I learned later also experience as wildland firefighters, ambulance operators, reserves, explorers. So a resume, that was fat. And there was 1,000 of us in the Anaheim Convention Center at the written. Mm. So not, 18 in a heartbeat, or maybe, just an EMT or whatever, but like all the qualifications ready to walk through the door, 1,000 of them. And for my class, it was 15. There was another class behind us on the same list of 15 as well. So 30 people. And when you look at that fraction wise, it's basically the two classes together is 3% of that room of qualified people taking the written. So now, like, some of my friends in the town that I live just told me I think they were looking for people for like 3 spots, I think, something like that. They had 11 people apply, of which, I think it was 13 people apply, of which 11 only confirmed, of which 6 only showed up, of which 3 only passed the test.
There you go. That's the 3.
There we go. So when we're looking at percentages, now we're at 100%, of the people. You see what I mean? So people are still able to get people, air quotes, but a big part of the conversation is, what percentage of the list are you taking? Are you taking the best of the best that are doing their PT, that are studying for the test, that are doing practice oral boards, that are doing station visits and ride-alongs? Or you just get anyone that throws an app in, you're just taking it. And then the downstream cost again of a bad employee, I've been told, is $500,000 to get rid of that person, who's probably going to end up going down some, medical disability route because their heart isn't in it, not a legitimate claim. So that's another part of this whole conversation, is our generation needs to story tell, like, hey, here's how it was and here's how it should be today. We've done something, because that was pre 9/11. So you can't even, that wasn't even factored into the demand in your world. It was in mine, but, we were there as a profession. There were enough firefighters where every single department was full and they still had thousands of thousands looking for a job. So that's where we can get back to again. But the question is, what do we do wrong and how do we turn it around?
I think we're, I love our department, and I'm proud of it. I feel like we're doing, it's obviously different than it was, 27 years ago, but like, even for the 24 spots and 180 people competing for it, that's not a great percentage, but that's what's whittled out of the written test and the CPAT. But watching my son, he just graduated high school. He's going to be 19 in July. When I got on, you had to be 21 to get on, and then now it's 18. You still have to have an EMT license to apply, or to make it through the application process, which is a challenge. That hasn't always been the case. A lot of times they accept whoever and then teach them EMT in that academy. I think that it's just different, geographically speaking, that there's some industry here in Tulsa for sure, especially the aviation industry and oil and gas, but there's nothing else to really steal away the types of people that become firefighters that are service oriented more. And Oklahoma's a pretty hardy state. I don't know if you've spent much time here, but it's, I feel like we're hardy and gritty people that tend to lend, the way we're raised tends to lend us to an easy transition into a service like the fire service. We're here to help and do dangerous shit, which is fun. I mean, it just is. It's a part of the job that we don't talk about enough. But I couldn't agree with you more that we need to do a good job of shifting the standard of what right looks like as far as a work week and be able to recruit more. I'd love to be able to get back to the point where we're interviewing or testing out 1,000 or 2,000 people for a 20 to 30 person academy that we pretty regularly, it's 20 to 30, each year, pretty consistent. I tell you what we need to be worried about, honestly, James, is strategically planning for the great exodus that is 2029, because there are, I bet, close to 200 of us on the Tulsa Fire Department that are going to leave in 2029 that were hired in between 1996 and 2002 that are all going to hit this band of like, oh, see, man, that's enough. My class will be 30 years exact right then. I bet most of us go in and around that time frame, and not just for hiring. How are we going to prepare to promote that many? Because I don't know, a lot of us that are on have been on for 27 years. Most of us are officers, in some level of form, and that ripple effect will be interesting.
Well, this is what's beautiful again about, the rising tide lifts all ships when it comes to, in this case, recruitment. Obviously, retention is not the issue because you guys are leaving legitimately. But when people say to me, well, we're not going to do the 24-hour, the 24/72 yet because we want to get 4 people on the rig first, or, well, we need to fill this station first. It's like, well, you can't even hire anyone now. You've got the cart before the horse. You have to do the changes that pull people in. And I would say that Tulsa was a good example of that. In the next 3 years, how can we make those lists big enough where we are attracting a lot of young people? And I would love to see the age go back to 21. I think 18, when you look at the psychology space and the neuroscience space, our brains aren't ready to do the things that we do at 18 years old. They're not. There might be some anomalies, but overall, science pretty much says that it's about mid-20s where our brain has matured. And that's when, I would argue that, some of the people that enter late, maybe it'd be interesting to study them. Do they do better because they've got that, physiological maturity in the brain? And, maybe this is why some of our soldiers struggle so much, because we put them in combat at 18 years old when they're physically still growing. So if PD does 21, I came in at 27, I think I actually was hired. Like you said, you were 21. I think that's a conversation of itself. But yeah, if you've got these changes like where I am, they're exploding. So they're going to need more stations. We need to get them to a 4-person rig. And so the first thing is fixing the work week, getting the people to come in. When you have the people come in and you have those big lists, now you're not so worried about retirements because you've got this massive demand at the front door that you can, obviously bring in people at the firefighter level or even do laterals if it's something you're open to. But then you can strategically start promoting the people that do have time on to prepare for that shift. But if, in like some of these other departments, you can barely get anyone now, what are you going to do in one of those, like 30-year exodus that you're talking about that I know, Anaheim and Orange County and some of these other places that I've worked, they had that, and it puts them at a massive deficit if you're not planning for it.
Yeah, man, I could not agree with you more. You ask anybody I was in the academy with, they will tell you that I was not ready to be on the Tulsa Fire Department. I mean, even though I'd, done the military thing, and that was obviously pre-war, so there's a whole lot of growing up that happens in combat. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't agree with you more, even though that's my son that's fixing to try to be on, this is the first class he's applying for. There's, absolutely no guarantees he's going to get hired. So, and he knows that. To me, I liked 21, but we were competing. Honestly, Oklahoma City, there's only 2 big departments in Oklahoma, where people can go and feel like they're on a metro-sized fire department that, or, out there ripping. And it's Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And it's, there's plenty of mid-sized departments, though, that people can go to. And we were competing against others. That's why we switched to 18. We were losing kids at Oklahoma City pretty quick. And they're, a third bigger than us, I think. They're a big department. They've got 1,000 people. And they're fixing to have their 40th station. So Oklahoma City is a huge town. Like it's 660 square miles. So it's like, 3 times the size of what Tulsa is. And I think that's just we're reactive. The fire service is reactive in its case, but I for sure wasn't ready. I'm one of those people whose frontal lobe didn't develop until 25.
Me too.
I kind of woke up in Afghanistan and was like, oh crap, this is real. Okay.
Well, let's talk about that. So you go through the front door of the fire service. How did you find yourself in the Middle East? Well, actually, let's just roll the clock back a little bit. Talk to me about 9/11, that day through your eyes, and then lead me through to how you found yourself in combat.
Well, so I got on in 99. I was in the Oklahoma Army National Guard with the 279th Infantry Regiment. That's my regiment. 1st Battalion, 279 Infantry is a part of the famed 45th Infantry Brigade combat team, famous from World War II. And I was on 9/11. I was actually in Fort Benning, Georgia, for the infantry officers basic course, and we were on a machine gun range. It was it's comedic now, but like we'd stayed out on the range for 3 days, and we were just doing machine gun training. That's it. And I remember I had a couple foreign students that were with me, and we were showing them how to fire the M240 Bravo machine gun. And this major came walking out and cease fire, everybody cease fire, come in. Everybody circled around him, was like, we're going to war, man. And we were like, what do you mean we're going to war? Like, what is going on? And so I think we ruck marched back to the barracks that day. And by the time we got back, we were watching, evening news recounts of what happened that morning. And we're like, oh, crap. I guess we are going to war. But pretty soon after that, we graduated and I came home, got back on the, if you go to an Army school like that and you're, a full-time firefighter, they just get military leave. And it doesn't count, at least in Oklahoma, it doesn't count against your service time. Your service time keeps clicking. You're just, you go on leave without pay for a while because the Army's paying you, and then you go back to being a firefighter. But pretty quick after we got back, they made some announcements like, hey, you guys are in the chute. The 45th is in the chute to go to Afghanistan in 2003. And so we did, and I got selected to go in this first group with a group called Task Force Phoenix, and showed up there, and we were there for a year. I mean, that was part of what was going on. But I remember it was such a big deal. I was like one of the first firefighters to deploy from the Tulsa Fire Department since the Korean War. So like people, they didn't know what to do with your leave. Like I sat down with the chief of administration at the time, and he's like, we don't know what to do. I guess you have to sell us all your sick leave in case you die. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Wow. And so I sold all my sick leave back to him. Like we don't know what to do. And obviously now there's a little more organized. It's not as anomalous. We've had plenty of firefighters deploy now. So, now there's a nice set, here's what we do. Here's your time off you get to make up the difference. Because a lot of firefighters, when I was a young tail gunner, is what we call firefighters, I'd make more when I was on active duty Army orders because I was an officer, so I didn't mind so much. But a lot of guys that aren't officers, they don't make the same amount of money when they're on active duty orders. So it's kind of a pain in the butt for them. But that's on 9/11. That's where I was at. I was in Fort Benning, Georgia, and came home and worked for really less than a year because I think our train up started in 2002, where we were on orders for a long period of time training up for that Afghanistan mission. And then I forget, it was right after September. My oldest daughter, our oldest child, was born about a week or two before we left. So that had been September 29th of 2003. Yeah. And then, came home and didn't spend any time reintegrating. I just went straight back to work because I was a dummy. But yeah, I mean, you spent a year in combat in Afghanistan. And it was good to come home. It was strange to come home and relearn how to drive and relearn how to not have a rifle on you at all times. I'm an infantry officer by trade for the Army. So I didn't hang out on a little base a lot. I was out doing missions almost every day. So it was a change. It was a challenge to reintegrate back into polite society where not everybody spoke, pointing a gun at you. But it was good to get back for me. It's what I felt like I needed then. But that's about the time that I started, I feel like using alcohol as a tool when I came back in 2004. That's about the time I started really seeing that I needed it to relax is how I used to term it, I just need to do this to relax. It's the only thing that makes me relax. Yeah.
Well, a question that I ask a lot of people that have been deployed before we kind of walk through that part. For the people at home that are left watching CNN or Fox, these polarizing, politically party leading propaganda machines that call themselves news, we don't really get the true perspective of war. Either let God sort them out, kill them all, stack bodies on one side, or they're all baby killers on the other side. And in the middle are our children that are sent overseas with a flag on their shoulder to go protect the indigenous population and fight for our freedom. Two-part question. Regardless of the politics that sent you out there, was there a moment where you witnessed firsthand that there were some horrific people that did need to be addressed?
Yeah, daily. Yes. Yeah, there were really bad people trying to kill us. They're not cool. I had 2 British soldiers that were killed in close proximity to us pretty early on, and by a suicide bomber. And you just kind of knew, it was like in the first or second week. Like it was really quick after we got there, but you just kind of knew, like pretty fast. Hey, this is real. Everybody's trying to kill us. They're not cool people. We're not nation building. That's trash. I could say that now that I'm retired from the Army. Like that's the dumbest thing we could ever think about doing is building nations. We're not nation building. It's more stability, operations than it is anything. It's very disingenuous for us to impress our systems of government on, tribal societies that don't think the way we think. Like it's crazy. Those 2 British soldiers were Royal Berkhan Regiment soldiers. Not too far, just outside of Kabul. That was late 2003, something like that. But yeah, they were bad people, for sure.
The other side of the question is we're not normally told of the kindness and compassion of, whether it's our own military or, the indigenous people. But I've heard so many stories, through the horse's mouth from people like yourself. When you reflect back now, what about that side, the kindness and compassion, even though you were on the battlefield?
I met village Maleks that were the kindest and wisest men I've ever met. Um, I met um, people in the Islamic faith or tribal people that would literally give up their lives to protect you because you were just a visitor in their area. Um, I think pretty fast you realize in combat that we're not in the always or never business. Like you can't say that, it's extremely ignorant and disingenuous for the American public to say I hate all Muslims. That is not something that anybody who spent any time dealing with these people at the tactical level should be saying. That is not, and I definitely came back politically changed. I saw the big war machine. I saw that Brown and Root had, cooks there that were making $80,000 a year, and my soldiers were barely clearing $1,300 a month. You saw the unfairness and what class warfare really was. You can't hardly fault the Vietnam generation for coming back and saying, "Hey, this is dumb. We're not. This is just a part of a big war machine." We cranked it right up right after 9/11. But if you ask me, I mean, we should have left Afghanistan in 2005. I think we were, mission complete and did what we did, and there was no reason for us to stay till 2021. Holy crap! They're still there in 2021, and but that's only my opinion. It's war's a big business, man. And it's in 2003 it was all that patriotic, sounds like a Toby Keith song crap. Like we're just, we're gonna put our boot in your ass. It's the American way. And yeah, we were there to do that. We were there to change the paradigm, but like at the same time, like we were probably done in 2005. Probably could have been done about then.
So you say it's just your opinion, but your opinion is invaluable. Like, if
Yeah.
you ask James Gearing, what do you think about Iraq? Like, how the fuck would I know? Like, I wasn't there. Now I listen to a lot of people, so I can disseminate, I can pass on this wisdom. But I'll tell you some common denominators from so many combat veterans and, Afghan, freedom fighters and Mujahideen fighters that I've had on the show. Is this, as you said, the first thing that everyone says is it's not the country Afghanistan, it's all these tribes that are in the country of Afghanistan. So we're coming in saying, hey, fight under this flag. And they're some of them are like, what is that flag? And then it's hard for us to wrap our head around. But if every state was a tribe, then, and they didn't realize that we were all part of the same landmass, it would be the same kind of thing. The special operations, special forces community have all said, as you kind of alluded to, that we should have gone in using especially some of the more specialist units, shut down the training camps, taken out the key targets, and then left. And then a lot of the Iraqis have said, the Afghans have said, the problem was that you guys had this incredible momentum and you were defeating the Taliban. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of our forces are dragged into Iraq, chasing, as we know now, a false flag of WMDs. And that took away that momentum that you had in Afghanistan. And now you end up kind of trickling through the next 15 years. So that's not my opinion. That's me just passing on what I've heard. And you just mirrored that. And then now here we are. And we've got people beating their chest and dragging our children into another conflict. And, it's like they've literally spat in the face of every veteran that served or, God forbid, we've lost, that all those lessons are written in blood. No one's listening to the men and women that actually served in the last 20 years. And now you've got this war machine ramping up yet again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably the number one reason, like, any of us that have sons, they'll see, my son watched me come home from, my last deployment and was like, what did you get to do? My last deployment was Ukraine in 2017 and 18. And, did you get to fire this? Did you get to fire that? He's in that formative time where he's, all jazzed up about like machine guns and tanks and stuff. I'm like, yeah, man, we got to do a lot of that stuff. It's fine. It was cool, And he wanted to, kids to get into like playing modern warfare and then like airsoft. And he's like, I want to join the infantry too, Dad. And I'm like, absolutely not. That's dumb. You can go join the Air Force and learn a skill. I'll let you do that, but no. Like, what skill do I have besides walking one way and shooting at people that don't look like me? Or I'm effective with a map and a compass, understanding terrain and topography. Like, that's a good skill. I'm not saying it's not a good skill in the event of a zombie apocalypse, but like right now, I think you're good, bud. You should just learn how to use computers and whatnot instead. You could still serve your country. I mean, and that's my perspective as a dad. I learned so much from the military, though. Like, I got so much out of them, and they got so much out of me. I feel like it's a wash. Like they taught me how to be a leader. They taught me how to really solve complex problems in a unique unique way to really understand an operational environment before I start cranking off decisions and shooting from the hip. Those are things that most people don't get, and I did. So I'm thankful for that. But my knees hurt, my hips hurt, my back hurts. There's better ways.
Well, it mirrors what we're talking about with the fire service, though. Like the profession itself, the teams of highly trained men and women in all the different branches that are a deterrent that maybe even, God forbid, have to deploy like a World War II situation is an honorable and admirable calling. But if those men and women are then abused and there's this kind of organizational betrayal and the moral injury that comes from there were no WMDs or the way that we withdrew or, whatever the thing is, then that's something that's absolutely preventable. That's not the job. That's the way that they're led. It's the way that they're worked. And, this is the conversation that parallels our profession. You can have the same exact profession that creates, fit, ambitious young military members, but you just don't deploy them frivolously so that, Halliburton or whatever can make these politicians money. You use them, like Scandinavia is a perfect example. You train them highly, but you wait and you hold the line, whatever needs to happen. And then, so it's not like, we shouldn't have a military. It's not that we shouldn't be prepared or have military spending. But as I've asked many people, but where's the checks and balances when these companies make billions and trillions of dollars? When we're at war, where is the deterrent? Where is the resistance to going to war in the first place when the sponsors of the current president are literally being paid by these companies?
I think I think it's very interesting how the GWAT affected the United States Fire Service too. Like, there's so many of us that are GWAT vets that are, at this point, a lot of them are either junior officers or pretty senior officers, and you're just like, oh man. And then that shapes us a little bit because we can get set in our ways as GWAT veterans, and we start seeing these youngins, these millennials and Gen Zers that are coming up through, and like we can't compare ourselves and our generation to theirs. Like, they've never done, like we think, oh, they haven't done anything hard. Well, their hard's different than our hard. Like, it's just different. Like, it's not the same. They didn't have a global war on terror to go and, mess around with for 20 plus years,
Which is a good thing.
Well, yeah, it's a great thing. I mean, it's just that I always giggle a little bit with like people who are gun nuts, like, because they're just like, they didn't get to scratch that itch, like they just like, man, they're like, or people that carry a weapon all the time, you know, like unnecessarily, like open. We see a lot of open carry, and I'm like, that shit's heavy, dude. I did that for years at a time. I don't want to do like, if there's trouble, I'm probably just gonna run away and just not deal with it. I just don't want to. I'm not gonna snap into action. I'm not Batman, you know. I don't think that way anymore. And there's a lot of reasons I don't think that way, anymore. But a lot of it could be the medicine, too. So, I'm not a pacifist by any means. I'm just like, man, I'll just go over this way. That looks like that guy's robbing somebody. It's not good.
Well, you mentioned Ukraine. I'm assuming that was obviously pre-invasion then. So were you training with them at that time, or was there a combat element even then?
No, it was a training mission. It was a part of the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine. So it was us, the Canadians, and the Brits that were a part of JMTGU. We were there 9 months, something like that. It was good. It was a good mission, man. I really enjoyed Ukraine. They were fighting Russian-backed forces in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts back then, and there wasn't a lot of fighting in Crimea then. They all that was Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 or something like that, and then we were there. I think the first JMTGU mission was like 15, and then there was another group right before us, and then the Oklahoma National Guardsman in 2017 and 18. And it was a good mission. It was worthy. We would train battalions of Ukrainian battalions in Western Ukraine, and then they would go to Eastern Ukraine and in the zone called the ATO, or where they were fighting Russian-backed and private military companies, that we know now as the Wagner Group. But that was pre-invasion for sure. I'm a big pro-Ukraine guy. Because of that, I still have lots of friends that are members of the Ukrainian military that I keep up with fairly regularly. So.
Yeah, no, and understandably so. I mean, those poor people. I saw the death toll. Must have been about 4 or 5 months ago, and I forget how many Ukrainians had been killed, but I think the Russians, it was up to 1 million. And you look again at the lunacy of that. That how many of those young Russians, I would argue, pretty much all men in that case, woke up and like, you know what I'd really love to do today? Be invade Ukraine. That would really make my day today. Like almost none of them.
I get frustrated at the lunacy of our own country that, when that happened, everyone was pro-Ukraine. Let's kick Russia. Let's do whatever we can to kick Russia out. And then somehow that became politically faux pas. And like all of a sudden Ukraine is that's the most corrupt country in the entire world. I'm like, how would you know, dude? Have you ever been there? Like, what do you mean it's a corrupt country? Like, they got invaded, bro. Like, I think we should. That's an undeniable fact. Like, we shouldn't. Mm-hmm. They weren't invited in. We saw it live on television. Everybody loved watching it for a while. And then when the narrative shifted, you're just like, that's ridiculous, And then it's, we're funding this war. Like, they're using our stuff that we keep replenishing. Like, I don't know if we're funding it, but
no one has any problems with the fact that we're funding Israeli weapons that are slaughtering women and children in Gaza. Because again, God forbid that you're, against innocent people being slaughtered, and now you're obviously a screaming libtard or whatever label you got, rather than just a fucking human being with a heart that doesn't want to see civilians murdered, no matter what faith, color, creed they are.
I don't understand anybody that's seen it in person wanting or rooting for war at all ever again. Like, I don't understand that. Now, I'm sure it happens. We're not in the always or never business. You'll hear me say that a bunch of times, James. But like, I'm sure there's dudes out there that have seen it and they're like, what we need? War. right now. We need some innocent people getting blown up, and casualties that are just bystanders. But I think if you see it and you have a similar heart to mine, you're just like, I don't think that's the business we should be in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, history's full of voices saying exactly that. How many people came out of Flanders Fields and like, yeah, war was great. 2 thumbs up, would recommend. 5 stars.
Yeah. 10 out of 10, man. And just in honor of that, I'm going to wear this poppy every November 11th, forever and ever.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so crazy, man. No, it definitely shaped me. I think it shaped me politically. Politically, I'm a moderate conservative. That's how I would classify myself. I do think we need a strong military. I'm not sure we should police the world, but I think we need a strong military. We got very pro U.S. military since I spent 1996 until 2024 part of it. So I did retire in 2024. So that's when I started growing my mustache. It's my open rebellion to the United States Army. You can't grow a good mustache when you're in the Army. You should be able to. Look at this thing.
It is majestic.
It would scare off most terrorists.
Well, you mentioned about when you first came back, that was when you started drinking, to unwind, air quotes. Walk me through that kind of, slow burn downward spiral, and then feel free to factor in any influences from your fire career as well that contributed to your struggles.
Man, yeah. I always, as an adult-ish male, 18 on, I was just a beer guy. I'd go have beers with friends, and early in my first marriage to my kid's mom, it was, we would always have beer at the house. Nothing ever super heavy. I'd say we're just, normal. But that's the first time I remember her saying something to me was, as when I got back, she said, all you do on your days off is fish and drink beer. And I'm like, yes, that's the charmed life I live. Because we lived in a small town in eastern Oklahoma where she was going to optometry school, and there's a beautiful river that runs through it, and I fished every day I could be off and drink beer. It was awesome. I think she came home from school and I was napping, and she was frustrated because I was, and that's in retrospect, looking back over the story of my disease of alcoholism, that's when somebody started, objecting to the amount that I was drinking, was in and around that time. I'm sure you could dial it back earlier than that. Like my mom, if she had known I drank any in high school, she would be against it. But over, when I got back from Afghanistan, I'd missed a promotion exam. And there were some junior people to me that promoted, and I'm like, oh man, that really motivates me. I would really want to try to promote as soon as I can. So in 2005, I took what's now our lieutenant's exam and was successful. And then the timing was just right. Like it just hit. And I was we called it driver back then. It wasn't lieutenants, but I took a captain's exam in 2007 and was successful. And that's what kind of started me on this meteoric, I came out number 1 on our captain's list, and I'm like, yeah, I did it. Especially with oral assessments, I was good at it because I have the gift of gab and I can bullshit with anybody, naturally, whereas a lot of firefighters don't have that natural skill set. And so I, did well and got promoted, and the next thing it was time to take a chief's exam. And in between all that time, we were raising kids, that's what we were in, that zone in our lifetime where, we had our first kid about 2 weeks before I left for Afghanistan. My son was born in July of 2007, and our youngest daughter was born in January of 2009. So about that time, we kind of identified we were done having kids. That's a lot of them things. But we were moving back to Tulsa, and those were really probably the best times in my life, where we were having the kids at that younger age, and she was working, I was working, we were doing good. By then I had a pretty good side job. I did industrial construction stuff for a company out of Chicago. So on my days off, I was traveling and making really good money, and was a captain. Loved doing that. It's the best job there is, I think. And then I remember we had a lake house, and my dad and I were fishing one day, and he said, "When do you think you want to retire, son?" And I said, "Well, 25 years would be nice, and I could just retire and do something else." And he said, "Man, if that's the case, you probably need to get busy making chief, if you want to get a chief's retirement." And I was like, crap, he's right. Like, the timing is right. So before you know it, I was taking a chief's exam, and I was successful on that too. And that's when the ego in you engages real, right? Because I was 36 years old when I made district chief, and I'm like, I'm a wunderkind, I'm the future, I'm like, this is awesome. And so I started doing things to prepare myself to take a higher role, specifically to be a fire chief. I went and finished a second bachelor's degree because I needed one to get into the executive fire officer program. Started the executive fire officer program, I think, in 2014, something like that. And then enrolled in a master's degree program at the University of Oklahoma for public administration. So I was laser focused on building a resume. When I first made chief, I went to a district, which is the same district I'm in right now, actually. And I kind of got voluntold to be the chief of training. And it basically said, hey, you can be the chief of training, or you can volunteer to be the chief of training, or you're going to be the chief of training. I was like, I guess I'll be the chief of training, which that was a good experience. I learned a lot. It's the first time you get to manage a budget as a chief officer. And then, we moved into a brand new 43-acre training facility here in Tulsa. So it was great. And I did that for just shy of 2 years and turned in that attaboy card for a district that I wanted, which was District 4, which is the north side of Tulsa, on A shift. And great district, great people. It was super easy though. It's easy to lead when you're surrounded by heroes, like guys that are just like always doing the right thing and always, just solid all the time, showing up to work without being, you're not having to bug them to come to work and not use a bunch of leave. And they were just always there, and it was great. And I rocked along there for a couple of years, and that's when that Ukraine deployment happened. And I was gone for 9 months and came back, and the fire chief asked me if I wanted to be the chief of staff, or his admin chief. He started calling it the chief of staff then. They never really changed the title until I was gone. But I was, things were looking up for me. I was finished my EFO. I was in my last semester of that master's program, and I was still in the Army. And I came home from, one of the summer training events. I had like 6 weeks of summer training events I was doing with them. And I was leaving, and I remember my wife essentially telling me she was unhappy, that she didn't feel like that she had that connection with me anymore, you know. She said it a different way, but like, I just remember saying, okay, look, we can talk about this when I come back. I'm going to be gone for 6 weeks. And I went to northern Michigan for a couple, 3 weeks. And then we were in Fort Riley, Kansas. And I came home, and a friend of mine who's the fire chief of Fayetteville, Arkansas, still is, great man. He'd just become the fire chief of Fayetteville. And I drove over to Fayetteville to collect some other friends from the Executive Fire Officer Program. We were going to surprise him. And I got a DUI in Fayetteville, Arkansas. You know, I got pulled over, and he had to come get me out of jail there. That was, you know, some of the most embarrassing thing I'd ever had happen in my life at that time. Since then, I've added many more. But, you know, that wasn't enough. Like, I came home, and, you know, my boss was the fire chief. I told him, and he gave me a written reprimand like they do everybody. But what's unique about the position I was in is that it was not protected by the union. There's only 2 positions not protected by the union, and it was the fire chief and that position. So that wasn't enough for me to stop drinking by any means. And then in November, on Veterans Day, or Remembrance Day for your people, on Veterans Day of 2019, my wife and I had separated. I was living in an Airbnb, and I don't remember how I got home and woke up the next morning, and every cop in Tulsa that I knew was on my phone as a missed call, and so was the fire chief. And I had hit a car, made it home somehow, poured myself into a bed, and he told me that this was a problem, and you know, I was going to be investigated, and I was subsequently demoted 2 ranks to lieutenant, and got demoted, you know, and that wasn't enough yet either. I mean, that to me, it was just like, you know, how could they do this to me, you know? And I know how silly that sounds now. Like, I acknowledge how silly it sounds. But I was so like, I'm on this meteoric rise to, you know, be the fire chief. Like, what am I doing? You know, how can they do this? There's been people, you know, arrested for DUI before, and, you know, I kept comparing myself to everybody else, and the fact is I wasn't the same as everybody else, you know. It was a real problem. But I started going to AA then, and I liked it. I mean, it was good. I stopped drinking for a while. Notice I don't call it sobriety. I just wasn't drinking, you know. There's a huge difference. And then COVID happened. Like March 16th of 2020, I had a 1-star brigadier general call me and asked me to be in his office the next day. I went to his office. He asked me what NIMS was. What's NIMS? I said, it's the National Incident Management System. He's like, do you teach it? I said, yeah, I do, actually. And so I ended up getting put on orders for a year, a little more than a year, and working for Governor Stitt, developing a multi-agency coordination center for him for COVID. And, you know, was, you know, full on in divorce, working through that, living in Oklahoma City, demoted, just all bad things, you know. Pretty quickly picked up drinking again. And it was just I was a mess, bro. I just was. I can't, in the middle of all that, like I'd been to an intensive outpatient treatment program with the VA because of the demotion. I went to a second one in Oklahoma City. I'd been to detox twice by then, and I couldn't figure out like what's going on. Why can't I just drink like a normal human, and still going to AA and still fighting. I'd have weeks or months at a time of not drinking, and just my life was upside down. Things that were true a year prior to that were no longer true. Like I wasn't a father, or I didn't feel like a father. I definitely wasn't a husband anymore. I was on this meteoric rise in the fire service, and I'm just in this epic crash, and it felt like the whole world went upside down. But I somehow made it out of that, made it back to the fire department, was still demoted, but I was a captain at this point in time. Felt pretty good, stayed not drinking for a while, and started back up again. But the toughest part was when I got re-promoted to chief. Like it really was. That was the hardest part for me because I'd spent 948 days demoted, and I counted it up, and I was like, this is, and in one of those moments of clarity, I wrote this like 5-page essay to myself. It's never been published or anything, about how I wanted to be different as a chief officer, like what I wanted to change. And then I got re-promoted, and it did not go good. Like it was like I wanted to be the Nate of old that people trusted and relied upon, and I was not. I was the Nate that they held cautiously at arm's distance and didn't trust, and could feel palpably that them waiting on me to screw up again, And so I just started drinking again, and ultimately I got smart and went and asked a friend who's in our administration. I just told him I needed help. I need help. I don't think I'm right. And he said, okay. He didn't throw rocks at me. He didn't, tell me I was a bad person. He and I have been friends a very long time. We're still friends to this day. And I'm glad he was there for me to say I need help, because I went to the Center of Excellence for like 34 days there in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and came home ready to tackle the world and relapse pretty quickly, honestly, And then I went back to the Center of Excellence for another 3 weeks to work on some trauma. I use air quotes because I had no clue what I was doing working on trauma. But as soon as I got back the second time, got married to a woman who was wonderful and was caring, and she, believed in me and believed in my abilities to get right, and I was doing so good that I felt like I'd beat it. Like I beat the disease, everybody. I'm good now. I think I can have a beer with my friends. And I forget the exact day when I picked up again, but it just sent me right back down that path that I was previously on. It's like I couldn't accept that I was an alcoholic at all. But at the Center of Excellence, I met a guy named Wade Hood. He's at Arlington, Texas fireman, still is. He's one of my best friends in the world today. And I thought Wade worked there. Honestly, when I got there, he was like, hey man, are you okay? And I thought, oh, I'm all right. And they gave me some medicine so that my withdrawals wouldn't be so bad. I literally thought he was a nurse. And then when I got a room assignment, he was across the bed from me. And he's like, "Hey man, how's it going?" I'm like, "Wait, you don't work here?" He's like, "Oh no, I've just been here a minute, you know." And Wade has had his own battles, and it's for sure his story to tell. But like, you know, I listened to his story and I thought, God dang, man, I'm not far off of that at all. I'm supposed to be this big successful chief officer, and you know, I'm nothing really. So after all those rehabs, you know, Wade and I stayed in touch, and you know, one point in time, he told me, he said, "Hey, I'm gonna go do this Ibogaine thing," and I said, well, "I don't know what that is. I'd never heard of it at all." And he said, "When I get back, I'll call you," and he did, and he made me fill out an application to the Casey Skudin 343 fund. I was at my farm on my tractor, and I was like, "Hey, I'll do it tomorrow when I'm at work." And he's like, "No, you fill it out now. I want you to fill it out. Open your phone, fill this out. This is for you. It's for veterans." He was wrong. It's not just for veterans. But, you know, he said, "Watch these, you know, podcasts," you know. So he sent me the Sean Ryan podcast, the first time I'd seen Sean Ryan podcast. And I'm watching this dude talk about doing psychedelics and with his wife, and I'm like, "What the shit is this, man? I don't know, man." But when Wade came back, he was so convinced, and man, my wife, I was ready to do anything to salvage that. You know, I would have done anything to salvage that, but I just couldn't. I'd say I was willing to do anything to salvage that, but I couldn't. I didn't have the capability to not drink. I didn't have the capability to stay sober over a period of time. One of the things I learned in inpatient treatment was how to chemically detox myself using Ativan, a benzodiazepine. I just kind of watched what their dosing was, and you know, in that time when I was not drinking, and then I'd go off on benders and drink again, the way that I didn't have withdrawals was I would get Ativan from the VA, and they would give me, 7 days of Ativan, and I would detox myself. Well, eventually they told me they were not going to do that anymore because they knew what I was doing. And so I just started going to Mexico and get it. Like I'd fly to Mexico and buy Ativan and then fly back to Tulsa, and then I could go on benders and chemically detox myself, and then convince myself that that was a better way to manage that disease, which obviously it is not, So I made the choice to apply for the Casey Skudin 343 fund. And the lady that founded that is a lady named Angela Skudin, who's been on your show. She's a wonderful human. She's from Tulsa, weirdly enough. She went to Bishop Kelly High School, one of the Catholic schools here in town, and she saw my application and she called me personally, which now I know, like the founder doesn't call people personally, but she did. She called me and she's like, "What's your deal?" And I'm like, "I'm an alcoholic, I think, I don't know." And she said, "Well, you're from Tulsa, so I'm going to help you out." And I went to Ibogaine in November of 2024, and it changed my life. It completely changed my life.
So let's talk about that for a second, because people that, I've had so many. I've had Marcus Capone, I've had Trevor Miller, I've had so many people in this world, all of whom have had their own Ibogaine journey, but especially the people in uniform. More often than not, they walk through the door expecting that combat deployment or that firefighter call to be the genesis of their suffering. But I hear over and over again that a lot of times it's actually their formative years that are really, the kind of crack to the foundation, if you like. What was your actual Ibogaine experience like? And then what were some of these kind of revelations that were behind the inability to stop drinking?
So I was in a really shitty mood when I showed up to Ibogaine. Like because they told you couldn't drink, 10 days before, and I drank the 10 days before, and I got in a huge fight with my wife, and she was so dejected that I would do that, and rightfully so. I mean, it was one of the mistakes of my life, one of the greatest mistakes of my life. And so I get there and I'm in a bad mood, and I remember my coach. Now she's a friend, but she said, "You were such a dick, like you were in such a bad mood, and I just didn't know how to even take you." But you do a sweat lodge the first day. The second day is some coaching and and then that evening is when you do your fire ceremony and set your intentions for what we're there for. Create a burn sheet of things that you want to get rid of in your life. And you take the medicine and you go into a ceremony room, and when the medicine takes hold for me, I purged, which is a fancy way of saying vomit, but I purged 7 or 8 times. And I remember having these eye masks on and seeing a movie screen that the curtain was down on. And the right side of it was very clear, and the left side was pixelated and had a big purple block in the middle of it. And I was like, what is that? And there was these little minions working on the screen. And all of a sudden it went clear, and the little minions went, yay! And then the curtain went up. And all this time I'm like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. This is weird, The curtain went up. And there was these things that we had when we were kids, like little little red binocular things that you put a disc into. It had pictures that I forget what they're called, Vista Views or something like that. But that's how these images were presenting to me. Like they just kept going in this circular fashion, And they coach you on what to do. Like you can talk to the medicine, you can ask it to be gentle with you, and all those things. So these visions started coming in front of me, and they weren't like super prophetic visions, but they weren't combat. They weren't the fire service, guts and gore and stuff we've seen. And that's what I was afraid of. I was afraid I was going to see combat. I was afraid I was going to see things I've seen on the streets, or I was afraid I was going to see every sin I've ever committed. And it wasn't any of that. It was just a bunch of stuff from childhood. And it was weird because I said, what are you trying to show me? And then the medicine got pissed off and started over. And I was like, okay, I'll just shut up now and just watch. Guess I'll just be quiet and watch. And I did. And then I fell asleep. I don't know how many hours I watched, but I did. And I fell asleep. And then the next morning I woke up and they were putting another IV in me. And they asked me if I wanted to go to my room, and I said, yes, oh my God. And I went and got in bed and stayed there for 24 hours. Didn't move at all. Like, they call that the gray day. It was exceptionally gray for me. Now knowing what I know, I've seen people pop down the stairs and want to go eat breakfast the next day. I'm like, those guys suck. But like for me, it was a pretty gray day. You get to the next day, and that's when we do 5-MeO DMT. And, Trevor, who's been on your show, he was who served me, which was such a gift, he's a wonderful human. 5-MeO DMT is very special medicine as well. And with that medicine, I was smoking. And I took a hit of it and was shot through the universe, like galaxies. And it felt like I was strapped to the front of a rocket. And I was flying through these galaxies, and they're flying past me. And then that galaxy folded in on itself and unfolded into a different galaxy, which was full of shapes that looked like kaleidoscope diamonds and colors of purple and gold. And I remember thinking to myself, I just can't let go enough. Like I'm trying to let go. I just can't let go enough. And this guttural yell came out of me out of nowhere. And then I broke into this white expanse, and I can see the love my kids have for me and that I have for them, and how conditional or unconditional that is, and how pure it is. And then I heard a voice say, all is forgiven. Everything that ever has been, everything that ever will be is already forgiven. Why are you worried? And I looked down at my legs and watched 100 pounds of guilt and shame melt off of me, and was just immediately like relieved. Like all of it was gone. All of that shame and guilt. And I remember Trevor telling us, like, hey, you'll know if you want another hit. So I thought to myself, do I want another hit? And then that same voice said, the medicine is within you. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I won't have another hit. And then I came to, I don't know how long that was, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And I came to and I saw Trevor. He's the first person I saw. And I just said, everything's forgiven. And he's like, yeah, man, you got there. Cool. And I went and sat down on just like the movie in Waves and War, it's the exact same house. Went and sat in the lawn and stared at the Pacific Ocean and was like, what have I been doing? I've been carrying all this for so long. And the medicine piece is great, but what made the difference for me was the post-integration piece, having a coach. And that's where we at 343 now, that's what we truly believe is that's where the real medicine lies, is in integration. Because my coach, that same coach that thought I was a dick the first time she met me in person, was like, really helped me reintegrate back into the world and create some new neural pathways that were going to be positive neural pathways that would change. And my new pathways were, working out, staying fit, doing something that was mind, body, and spirit oriented every day. And I had a coach to help me through that, and that's what it was great, But that desire to drink, or that idea that someday I'd be healthy enough to have a beer with my friends, was immediately erased from me and has not returned. It just does not exist. And I'm grateful for it every day. I mean, I'm around people that drink all the time. It does not bother me at all. I don't like hanging out with drunk people, but they were annoying before, but now they're kind of super annoying. But it's just I don't have any desire to drink at all.
See, and this is what's so amazing to hear. I mean, so many different areas that you talked about, but the ability for opioid addiction and for alcoholism to literally be smited. And again, I agree with you 100%. The people that have been really successful have carried on the integration. It's not a magic pill. You don't walk away after that weekend never having to do any work again. But conversely, I've heard a lot of people that weren't even aware of some of the trauma that was buried inside their mind, sexual abuse and all kinds of other stuff. And when they're able to get to that, now they can go to their counselor and start, keep processing it. Maybe now the EMDR will work on that event. Now you've identified it. So you're able to layer these. But, the number of people that were, they were taking opioids, or they were, drinking, God knows how much every day. And then they came out the back end with zero desire. I can think of so many Navy SEALs and firefighters and cops that have told me that very thing. And that is so incredibly exciting, because we go back to, the opening part of this conversation and the addiction that you see in your streets that therefore leads to the homelessness more often than not. And we have this plant medicine available, and it's, the question is why isn't this available right now? And yes, there's been some posturing on a national level, but at the same time, the FDA has also turned down MDMA-led psychotherapy, another incredibly powerful tool. So we do have the answers, and it is healing so many people, but there is resistance against it. And I've heard there's a lot of money in recovery centers, and then even some of the actions of some of these centers are set up for relapse, because now, you're paying another 10 grand to come back. Fantastic. So the efficacy of this, that isn't for every single person, but to take someone who's drowning in addiction, and I'm trying to get a friend of mine who's struggling with alcoholism in England at the moment to the new Malta location of Trevor's Center. The ability where nothing else has worked. And this, he, for example, is an example that's of someone who spent tens of thousands of pounds trying to get well, but the modalities just haven't worked. So for this to be a powerful tool that can take someone that's done a lot of work, been to, rehab centers, been to mental health counseling, and it just wasn't working. And then they do this plant ceremony for 2 days and they come out the other end completely different. I mean, it's such an exciting and important conversation in our profession.
Is your firefighter friend, or is he a firefighter or a first
He's not.
responder?
He's a civilian in the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exciting for Trevor and Ambio, Malta, that just to be able to touch the European market. Alcoholism is not a regional problem. It's like it exists everywhere, right? And when I came home from Ambio, I was on fire for this. I'm like, this is amazing that I don't want to drink. And anybody that isn't an alcoholic or doesn't think about alcohol or frame alcohol the way I did, doesn't really understand the miracle that it is that I don't want to drink. It's a weird miracle. But I had a friend whose wife had just passed before I went, and he was in active alcoholism. Just retired. He was a colonel in the Army, and he had just retired from the Army. And I went to his house and I said, hey, boss, listen, we need to get you to this. This is really important. And I didn't get to him in time. I mean, he didn't make the decision in time. He ended up dying and drinking himself to death. That's it. I don't carry that as something I didn't do, but he's an example of a savable life that just didn't know, When I mentioned I came back on fire, I called Angela and thanked her for what she did for me and told her that I'm here for 343 for the rest of my life. And if I can find a way to be useful, please let me know what I can do. And she said, "Oh, okay, but won't you just spend the next 5 or 6 months sitting in this, calm down." And then, and that is really important advice, in my opinion. Like, post medicine, you're a new person. You need to sit in that medicine for 5 or 6 months, at least 90 days, at the very least 90 days, and just be in the medicine, not try to change the world. Today I tell people, hey, when you get back, you're going to want to start a nonprofit. I need you to calm down for a second. Trust me on this. There's plenty of nonprofits out here. But I told Angela I'd help, and then about 6 months after being back, I, found myself in another divorce, and I stayed sober through it. And it wasn't hard. That's the other two pieces are I stayed sober through it, and it wasn't hard. That is something in the past that wouldn't have been a possibility. It would have been. It wouldn't have been a possible thing. And I knew then, like, man, this is real. This is so real. Like, I've got to do something to help others get to this, because this is saving lives, including mine. And so she offered she asked me if I wanted to go to a fundraiser with Rob O'Neill, Navy SEAL on the Bin Laden raid, and another SBS guy from Britain, and I don't know, there's a couple other dudes of this deal. And I was telling the story just like I just told you the story, to a guy named Henry, and Brian Hubbard from Americans for Ibogaine walked up, and in his very deep Southern, Kentucky way, like, we're going to make you an ambassador for Americans for Ibogaine. And I said, I don't know what that is, but okay, that sounds great. I mean, what do you do? Is it like a secret handshake or something? But it was just, it's, committed to legislative advocacy. Last week, the governor signed House Bill 3834 into law here in Oklahoma, which is authorizing clinical trials of Ibogaine in Oklahoma. I passed a law. Like, that's crazy to me. But I think that's the power of the medicine. I really do. I believe that the universe has me exactly where it wants me right now. And I was in a meditation the other day about this and realized, if the universe has me in exactly the position that I need to be in right now, what a gift that addiction was. What a gift those divorces were. What a gift all of this was, to place me in a position where I can be useful to a cause that is greater than my own. I mean, if you think about it like that, that's some pretty heavy stuff, Like, you had to go through all that just so you could be useful today, right now.
Absolutely. You mentioned before, when you are in your 5-AMO DMT and you see the guilt and the shame sliding off. Prior to this, had you had any periods at all of suicide ideation?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't call it an attempt, but it kind of was in 2019. It was an exceptionally ugly splitting with the kid's mom and I. And I don't want to get into details, but there was just enough that I took a pistol and a bottle of whiskey and a tent out to a lake and had some friends come find me. And thank God they did, Thank God they did. And it was, like I said, I mean, you don't trauma compare with others. I don't. I try not to anyway. And I've had friends that have either overdosed or killed themselves on the fire department that were a direct result of some substance abuse, period. And we didn't have the skills to do the right things with them. We didn't, even though Ibogaine has existed for centuries, we didn't have the skills to do what is needed for them. Some of them were addicted to opiates that were the direct result of injuries from this job, which is super common, right? Like, some of these kids today are addicted to Adderall, and they're on Adderall so that they can function in this job, or they can study to promote for this job, or any of those things. And they're being encouraged to use Adderall by people who have also used Adderall, and albeit probably more successfully than they're using it. But all that does is increase the usage, which is increasing the opportunity for addiction. And when you can't get Adderall anymore, a good surrogate to that is cocaine. And you'd be lying to yourself if you didn't say, hey, this is a real problem in the United States Fire Service. We know that drinking is a problem, but not everybody's an alcoholic either, But if something like alcohol or Adderall or anything is becoming your center of gravity of your life, it's becoming an issue. And there's no other kind, gentler way to say that. Like, we encourage binge drinking in the fire service from the academy graduation on. Name a company event that you ever went to that didn't have alcohol at it. Up to and including weddings and funerals and everything else. They were just it was such a part of it was such a center of gravity for me. Those were my excuses to drink, And I don't blame the fire service for this. Don't get me wrong, or any of it twisted. I don't even blame myself. I'm just a human. So one thing that this medicine has showed me is I'm a normal human, that I'm an alcoholic. That's it. That doesn't make me a bad guy. I'm still a decent person, I think. But I've never drank one of anything ever. So knowing that and just being honest with yourself and say, there's millions of people get sober every day without Ibogaine, right? But knowing what I know now, it's definitely a tool in the toolbox for this endeavor,
Absolutely. The reason I asked about the suicide, and I think this is a really important thing to put front and center, along with solutions like Ibogaine and MDMA and ayahuasca and all the things that we're seeing are also being incredible tools. But our generation, when we were young, we were told that suicide was selfish and cowardly, and how could they do it, and think of the kids and all these things, and it was more shame and guilt on someone who was drowning in shame and guilt. And listening now, 1,200 plus episodes, that's a lot of people that have stories like you. Some people that actually went through with their attempt, and they're talking to me because they survived it. And the common denominator that is, when someone is going through the perfect storm of all these contributing factors that are rewiring their brain. So, everything from childhood trauma that's unaddressed to relationship issues, financial issues, sleep deprivation, moral injury, combat, etc., and they get to this perfect storm of mental ill health, their reality becomes distorted, and there is a belief, an absolute belief, that they are the reason for the suffering of the people that they love the most, and if they just remove themselves, everyone else would be better off. Now, to a healthy mind, that makes no sense. You're leaving the people grieving you and adding more trauma. But at that moment, these men and women seem like they have that reality. And therefore, I would argue, in that distorted state, that suicide was probably terrifying. So it was courageous and it was selfless because they believed that they were actually going to be helping the people that they loved. Again, makes no sense to a healthy brain, but understanding that is not a healthy brain that we're talking about when people are at this point of crisis. Did you have that same voice whispering in your ear that you were the problem and you were causing the pain for the people that you love?
Yeah, and honestly, it makes me a little bit emotional to think of, but like, almost that I was so much of a failure as a father and as a husband that the kids would be better if I just didn't exist. And it was always the kids. It was for me, it was always the kids that, even in my medicine visions, I didn't see the kid's mom. I saw the kids, that doesn't mean she's a bad person at all. She's a wonderful human being. She's a great mom. But like, it's It was the kids, you know. On my burn sheet that we burn before medicine, I wanted to give up alcohol in my life, and I wanted to let go of resentment I had towards her. And I was able to do that. The medicine did that for me, you know. That plus a bunch of integration and working through all that stuff. Those were tough times in 2019 for me. And then, you know, I definitely see suicide, like you have indicated, as I see it differently than I did prior to that. But I also see mental illness differently than I did. And I didn't realize that I'd been carrying mental illness for 20 plus years, and I was just a super high functioning alcoholic, and until I wasn't, right? But man, if you're honest with yourself, you really realize that all of us have a level of mental illness. You know, there's very few people that are just walking around all sunshine in real life. You know,
Not me.
like
That's for sure.
They may be wearing a mask of sunshine, but they're just not deep inside. There's something that everybody's struggling with something. And if the minute you're not empathetic to someone that opens up to you, it's like you're not even human anymore. I'm so fortunate to be in this position now that I'm recovering out loud, and people know I'm in recovery. And this isn't a shock to people that Nate doesn't drink and is walking a different walk than I used to walk. But I'm also helping people all over the nation doing this. So I can't tell you how often I talk to someone and they're so thankful that I'm honest about this. Thanks for being honest about this. I'm like, God damn, it's like this, like not honest for about 20 years. I guess I wasn't. You know, I was just a lie. And I think Ibogaine made me a better leader. I guarantee it helped me be a better father. You know, I'm something that they can actually see as, you know, an example of resilience now. My kids know now that failure is not the end. It's just a hiccup, you know. And it's something my dad told me when I was a kid, that you're only a failure when it's the last time you try. Man, I kept trying, you know, and I wish I could have been successful at beating alcoholism the way that millions of people do, just straight through AA and, you know, finding a higher power. I needed a little bit of help from an ancient root bark from West Africa to get me over that hump. And, you know, thousands of other people do too. And that's what we do at 343 now, you know. I mean, like I said, 6 months afterwards, I started getting involved and became an ambassador for Americans for Ibogaine. And my life has completely changed since. You know, the culmination of passing a law in Oklahoma and working with organizations like Americans for Ibogaine and vets and then, you know, transitioning to a board member of the 343 Fund for a while, and then into the role of CEO of the Casey Skudin 343 Fund. I mean, this is my life's work now. And I couldn't be happier. I mean, it's, you know, it's for zero money. Like I don't get paid anything. It's like, this is an all volunteer army that exists. This isn't for, you know, art. You know, I'm not on some grand commission based fundraising scale or anything weird like that. It's just, I'm doing this because I found out about it because a guy I met in rehab told me about it. And my skill set is in organizing and building strategic visions for organizations, and that's what we're going to do. So, that's where I think it's a wonderful organization. I really do, man. It's like I couldn't be more proud to be a part of something like Casey Skudin 3435.
You said about resilience, you said about being a better leader. It's funny because this mirrors, the work week conversation. This is where I think we need to be with the mental health conversation as well. If we're talking about all the elements that lead to, suicide, lead to addiction, lead to even, injury on the job, there you can pick it apart, and sleep is a huge impact. Sleep deprivation is a direct correlation with all things mental ill health. It's proven, from cognitive acuity through to addiction, suicide, etc. And then we talked about, you give more rest and recovery. What happens? You get a better firefighter. It's resilience. It's high level performance. Well, it's the same with the mental health conversation. You're a better firefighter. You're a better leader after that you've been able to work through some of the things that you didn't realize, were the thing beneath the thing. And that post-traumatic growth conversation, that performance conversation, that when you do the work and when you find whatever toolbox is your unique toolbox, and let's say it's Ibogaine and then, EMDR or whatever the things are, and then canine therapy, that you 2.0 will be a better father, a better partner, a better firefighter, more compassionate, more empathetic, calmer on scene, able to get into that flow state where you are searching for that child because you're well slept and you don't have a fucking hurricane in your brain anymore. This is, I think, what makes me so excited. It's not just the healing, which is so important because we're losing people left, right, and center. But let's cross that chasm into performance. Waves of War is about a bunch of Navy SEALs. And if you listen to a 2026 conversation in these team rooms now, they're pushing performance. And there's, I think, a lot of the conversations as far as, not just getting out of a suicide ideation, but using these calm minds for the performance side. So no matter how you look at it, it's good, and good. Yes, you're pulling someone from crises, but you're also forging this higher performing SEAL, firefighter, cop, whatever it is. So to me, when people understand why they get to this point and listen, like if you've got a friend who's talking about being a piece of shit, then maybe that's a giant red flag to get them some help, because that shame and that burden is starting to become insidious in their mind. But you pick apart these reasons for people struggling, and then you're like, but we can fix so many of these elements. And you look at this immense toolbox that you have, including these plant medicines that we've been talking about today. It makes who you are the other side of that journey so exciting. So it takes away the stigma, it takes away the fear, and it's like, now it's worth the work because I'm going to be fucking better in my own home and in my station.
Yeah, you mentioned those Navy SEALs and talking about performance, and how fortunate I've been to meet a bunch of those guys from the movie, and as being a part of AFI. And they are great, and Special Forces Green Beret guys that are still out in the space. I get to talk to a bunch of them a lot. But even then, what we've shared in previous stories, because they're all veterans of the GWAT era, right? But the military, I guess up until the early 2020s, they're a zero defect organization. Some of these high performance, I can't tell me how many guys that I know that got a DUI when they were in the Ranger Battalion and then got sent out to Big Army, because they can't have any defect, right? I don't see a value in that now. Yep. And so in the fire service, I've turned this into like another concept. I think that I'm like, we can't discipline our way out of substance abuse or mental health issues. What we need is a new paradigm shift in how we deal with this. So like as a chief officer, as a member of the man, a white helmet guy. Like, what does right look like when it comes to this? Is it, because it damn sure ain't the EAP program that we use in all of our assessments, right? Because EAPs are trash. They're just trash. I mean, like, is it a more robust program that you voluntarily become a part of, that where you actually can achieve sobriety? Maybe it is. EAP is going to ask you to go to 12 meetings, slap you on your ass and tell you good luck. That's it. Trust me, I've done it twice. That's not. I mean, it's just not. And it's not. And this is not an indictment of those people in the EAP programs. It's just that, like, they can only do what they can do. And nor is it an indictment on the leadership of the United States Fire Service. They learned it as from watching other chief officers. So at least in Tulsa, you get a DUI, you're pretty sure you're going to get a written reprimand first, and the second one you're going to get fired, right? Or, well, then what do? Go kill yourself because your whole identity is being a fireman? Is that, do they want that? I'm sure they don't, right? So, like, what's the solution? And I'm not even saying that Ibogaine is the solution for everybody. It's not. There's plenty of people that come to the 343 organization that are deep in an addiction that we counsel and tell, hey, go to a 30-day rehab first. You're not ready. Like, this, Ibogaine's not step one for you. It just has to be that way because in the fire service has got to figure it out to where, like, that's the very final option, which should be the termination of someone's employment. Especially for us, because so many of us define ourselves by what we do. Like, kids don't grow up wanting to be accountant men. They grow up wanting to be firemen. And, like, that just is what it is. And if you take that from someone, it might as well be a death sentence to some. So I think that, and I've seen it, again, super proud of the Tulsa Fire Department. I've seen us shift how we deal with that. I've seen them make a commitment to, let's get a solution for this guy, and not just cut their heads off. You cannot discipline your way into this. I've also seen it shift a completely opposite direction, where guys are, pretty boisterous and like, hey, let's not be testing for THC anymore. I think there's some legitimacy to that argument, but I think I'm a firm believer, this is my personal opinion, that any substance can be abused. I mean, I'm not going to exchange one substance for another, but it is, I feel like we're doing a better job than when I got hired. But that is not the case across the United States Fire Service. There's countless examples of kids getting their first DUI and getting fired from a fire department and sent on down the road. And they're languishing right now because that was their identity.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I've said this many times. And this is sadly something more prevalent now, again with the recruitment crisis. If you hire someone who was a terrible hire at the beginning, that's one conversation. But more often than not, we're talking about people who now, are in this, angry phase, and they're making mistakes, and they had DUIs, and the question is, but what were they like when you hired them? Were they like that? Well, how did they make it through probation if they were effing and blinding and getting that? They weren't, were they? So they degraded throughout this profession. So we have a part in this kind of fall from grace, if you like, and therefore we have a responsibility to pick that person up. And don't get me wrong, some people are just going to cross lines that you just can't regain employment. But I would argue that's a small percentage. There's so many people that we can, kind of envelop and find the help that they need, because they were a phenomenal firefighter and they hit this wall and they got burned out. And again, as we talk about with these working conditions, that affects relationships at home, and then that, amplifies the struggles that they're already having. And the next thing, they're drinking themselves to sleep and, driving home, half drunk or whatever it is. And then, because I mean, so many people listening, if we put our hand on our heart, we can all think of one time, if not probably a handful, if not more, of times where if we'd been the person that was pulled over at that moment, we would be the one with the DUI. And I'm not saying I've ever got shit-faced and driven home, but I'm sure I've been over the limit, even if it just by a little bit. So, there, but for the grace of God go I. So to have that compassion and empathy with people that you have served alongside for 5, 10, 15 years, that now they've hit a wall, why can't we have the same empathy with them than we do with these complete strangers that call 911?
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think, like I said, I think our, the fire department I get to work with is doing that. There's definitely been a shift, and the problem isn't stopping. Seeing someone get in trouble for getting a DUI isn't stopping others from doing that same thing. I think what will slow that process down is talking outwardly about the disease of alcoholism, about the disease of addiction, about knowing what those precursors look like. I told a young man one time that, hey man, if you're buying your second 30-pack for the weekend, that's a problem. No one ever told me that when I was growing up. No one ever said, hey man, if you're measuring your weekends in 30-packs, that's the very definition of binge drinking. That's a problem. That's not normal. You should look at not doing that. And hopefully he did, that's the deal, is that but that was every weekend for me for a good solid couple of decades. Anytime I got together with my friends that weren't firemen, it was, the cost of entry was at least 130-pack into each other's houses. So, I had to have a whole other fridge in the garage just for beer, for the love of God. It was, it was crazy. So you think about that now and it's like, oh man, that's kind of silly, but that's how it is. We haven't explained that enough. We haven't talked enough about the disease or mental health or feeling sad or depressed. If you've seen a guy at the firehouse that's just quiet that day and normally he's loud and boisterous and jokey, and you say, what the hell is wrong with you? That's the extent what we've done. What's wrong with you? Come on, let's go. I think we're doing a lot better job today, at least where I work, and the people I get to see, of, hey man, are you going to treatment? Are you going to therapy? Are you taking advantage of the free therapy we do have? And I think I see it more often being used. So there's some hope. This in conjunction with, and I'm super interested in the 24/72 work cycle, especially now that I started, when we started off this conversation, we started framing it through that lens of FLSA Part K, and I wonder what somebody's doing with the federal government, because that's how nerdy I am. I start thinking of political decisions or political solves to this problem.
Well, I think with the FLSA, it was interesting. Firstly, it should be gone. It was born out of ridiculousness, the same way that drug prohibition was, which has created so many issues in the homelessness and the addiction on the streets, rather than those men and women be able to seek help, without being stigmatized or arrested. But a lot of departments that have made the change have just been like, well, we're not going to be shackled by FLSA. And so they moved to the 24/72, 42-hour work week. And the understanding is that built-in air quotes overtime, which, is it really? That basically is a wash, because when you go down to a 42-hour work week, your hourly rate has gone up anyway. So it's kind of absorbed this air quotes loss that people perceive. And so you've negated it regardless. So a lot of these are like, dude, whether it changes or not, we're just doing this. And it's the same with drug prohibition. You know, whether the laws are going to change or not, we're going to go to Mexico because people are dying and we need to get them help. And so, you know, waiting for the government, again, the FDA, government organization, denied MDMA-led psychotherapy. FDA also approved OxyContin, which has created the fentanyl crisis we have today. So do we need to wait for a federal thing to change, or do we figure out how to change it ourselves? And then hopefully that will come on the back end. But in the meantime, our men and women need the rest and recovery. And I tell you, no one in a government building is going to move fast enough to wait for them to act first.
We should make a T-shirt that says "Legalize naps at the firehouse."
There we go.
For sure.
Speak to Brian Hubbard.
Yeah, copy. No, on the answer to what the FDA thing is, this is my political pitch. I think it's both, James. I think that it's we still have to get people to Mexico right now. That's, you know, and I feel like I'm embodying both. Getting people to Mexico right now, I think that's going to happen in perpetuity, to be honest with you. I don't think that'll ever not be a thing. And then we also need to be doing political advocacy because we've had such a unique lived experience. I spent the last 5 months at the state capitol in Oklahoma telling the legislators my story. Hey, I know I look like I'm a normal guy, but I'm standing here in front of you, an alcoholic that has been cured, that is living a recovered life, that couldn't be happier because I went and did this psychoactive medicine in Mexico that's not legal to do in the United States. And we're not asking you to make it legal right now. We're asking you to study it and start that process, because we understand, especially from the perspective of Americans for Ibogaine, we can complain about the FDA and their process, or we can start the damn process. And we're choosing at AFI to start the process. Do it the right way. We can't. In Oklahoma, we legalized medical marijuana and had no plans of a state to implement this. And so there were dispensaries on every damn corner. There were foreign nationals buying up large chunks of agricultural land in the state. And we threw our hands up and said, we got to do something. We got to change something. So finally was born a state agency that had the responsibility to get their arms around that problem. We don't want that with Ibogaine or psychedelics or MDMA or any psychedelics, including MDMA. No, from what I understand, the MDMA is more likely to be passed in the next 12 months or cleared by the FDA in the next 12 months, just like psilocybin is. And they're in at least phase 3 clinical trials. They didn't have to start all over. Whereas Ibogaine, we're at the very start of this, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the parallel journey, absolutely. But I'm just saying, don't wait for one to be approved while you have access to the other.
I call the federal government Uncle Sugar. And if we're waiting on Uncle Sugar to do anything, we're just going to be hungry. You got to do that advocacy stuff. And to me, there's nothing more powerful than that of public opinion in our stories. So, I mean, Brian Hubbard and Governor Perry go on Joe Rogan and tell their story. And then Joe Rogan has the ability to text the president of the United States, and we start making changes that fast. Hey, let's not be mad at it. Let's go on down the road. And maybe somebody else has that kind of power and ability to affect change because of opinions being changed in real life based off stories of people, real humans that are achieving this kind of healing.
Absolutely. Well, I want to be mindful of your time. We've been talking 2.5 hours already. So for people listening, talk to me about the Casey Skudin 343 Fund, how it can help people listening that are in the first responder professions, and then how people can donate to support it in the first place.
Well, I tell groups all the time, everyone in that room knows someone who's dealt with mental health or substance abuse issues, and now they know too, me and whoever the other person is. This absolutely saved my life. Our website is 343fund.org. There are two really important buttons on there. One of them is apply, and the other one's donate. The apply button, you can go through and fill out an application. If you're a first responder, our applications last month went up 300%, probably as a result or an effect of, the President Trump's executive order signing. We're here for first responders to achieve healing. That's our mission. Go through the application process, and we send, right now, we're on pace for 120 first responders a year to AMBL Life Sciences. So last year we sent just shy of 120. But our program is unique in that it has a 12-month integration program. So you're assigned a coach. You have somebody to actually come back into the normal civilian world and reintegrate you back into society. And that 12-month process is invaluable, and that's really where the medicine lies. And you can ask any of our grant awardees or clients, that they'll tell you the same, that it's a wonderful program that exists with the singular mission of bringing healing to first responders. And as far as donations go, if on that there's a donate button, it's pretty simple. You can donate one time. One of our largest campaigns we have right now is our for the price of a cup of coffee, or $3.43 a week. You can fund first responders achieving this healing. We've got a goal of, if we can get 6,000 people to do that, we can pay for medicine and integration for 120 first responders a year, forever. We're not at 6,000 yet, so tell your friends, and please, open up your hearts and donate to this, for people like me, for people that were at the end of their rope, for people that are really truly struggling, that happen to be in a profession where their mission is saving you and showing up at their best on your worst day. Many of them are hiding the demons and the mental health and the substance abuse behind that mask, and I was one of them. So if you can dig deep in your heart and find a place to help us out, we would truly appreciate it. We don't have any full-time employees. 99.5% of every dollar goes to either coaching or helping people get through this program and the administrative costs of it. Like I said, we don't have any full-time employees. I'm a complete volunteer. It's not going to fund salaries. It's not going to do anything except help first responders. And we're going to stay that way. That's how it's going to have to be.
I was just thinking, I'm sure obviously this is something you guys have already thought, but how many unions out there that have benevolent funds that are looking for, a nonprofit to support? What a beautiful way to kind of pay into something that maybe one of their members ultimately will end up using anyway. So, I mean, if all the thousands of unions that are out there were able to kind of feed this into a weekly or monthly donation, aside from obviously some of the local things that maybe they're supporting, I mean, that in itself would probably cover the 6,000.
It absolutely would. And to that point, could not be prouder of my own local 176 here in Tulsa. They're very gracious supporters of the Casey Skudin 343 Fund. And to your point, their benevolence fund has done a lot of good work with us. So couldn't be more proud of them. And we got a great local, man. It's, we've been around since 1919. They do good work.
Well, you said the fund was at 343fund.org. What about yourself? Where are the best places to reach out to you or learn more about you?
I mean, I'm on the website, but my email is just nate@343fund.org. You can always get me. I answer each and every email. So if you're a police officer, a firefighter, or EMT, or flight medic, or even kind of look like a first responder, reach out and ask for help. You know, I get a lot of people that aren't first responders asking for help. And we spend some time getting them to the right organizations. You know, there are other nonprofits in this space that we're really committed to helping each other. I don't believe in cornering the market and helping folks. You know, I don't think there's not a palpable benefit to that. It's easier for us to, you know, stay in our lanes and help as many as we possibly can. And we've got a great partner in Ambio Life Sciences. They do, you know, that's the primary and only clinic we use in Tijuana, Mexico. So you've had Trevor Miller on your show. He's one of my favorite humans on the earth. So he just, you know, we work good with him.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you so much. I mean, firstly, obviously, for the diversity of the conversation, but more importantly, for the courageous vulnerability to bare your chest and tell your stories and go to some places that, you know, I'm sure were uncomfortable to revisit. But your story, I know, will resonate so deeply with so many people and hopefully pull them out of the shadows and force them to pull up the app on their phone or the website and, you know, hit that apply button themselves and save many more lives. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Thank you so much, James. And if there's anything I can do for you at any time, please call.